Well, joining us live now is our Sky News US contributor, Michael Ware. Michael, good to see you. Amongst the targets that the military hardware attacks when these wars come along is that network of tunnel systems. It's quite impressive what they're able to do, actually, to build them in the first place and what they are able to smuggle through. But just how effective is that bombing campaign by those Israeli fighter jets?
Well, how effective is the campaign against the targets? Well, that's hard to determine at this point because we certainly have the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, touting its success in targeting these tunnels, and obviously we're not hearing from Hamas. But first, let's get a picture of what we're talking about here. What started out years ago as smuggling tunnels underneath the border and then extended into terror tunnels reaching into Israel has now been expanded over the last 7 years into what the Israeli security forces call a metro or a mini city. It's a vast network of tunnels that have concrete walls, electricity, have carts inside them. It has chambers buried within these tunnels beneath them, as deep as anything from 20 metres to 70 metres deep. So that's to try to defend against Israeli bunker buster bombs and other munitions. But just to give you a sense of the scope, the Israelis put out this week a computer model or a computer tour of what these tunnels look like. And they go for dozens and dozens and dozens of kilometres. In fact, in the third series of attacks on these tunnels, the IDF says on Monday alone, their fighter planes destroyed 15 kilometres of tunnels. Let me say that again, 15 kilometres. And there's many more kilometres beyond that. And Israeli sources say that over the past 7 years or so, Hamas has invested as much as $1 billion in developing this subterranean infrastructure. So this is a thing of true significance. Hamas calls it a defensive infrastructure, but Israel knows it's more than that. It can be used to attack Israeli troops as they enter Gaza, the idea of the enemy popping up behind you from anywhere. And the Israelis know that these tunnels can also be used for kidnapping and abducting Israeli soldiers or taking their
and have done in the past, yeah.
And then holding them for ransom. Yeah. So, and obviously this is where Hamas is storing its vast arsenal of rockets. Now, according to the IDF, we've seen 3,700 plus rockets, almost 4,000 rockets fired at Israel over the 9 days so far of this conflict. However, that same Israeli Defense Force says Hamas has anywhere upwards of 15,000 of these rockets. So they're just beginning to eat into their store of rockets, and goodness knows how much longer this is going to go.
Who's supplying the rockets mainly, Michael? Is it Hezbollah? Is it Syria? Is it Iran? How's it getting there?
Well, that's a great question. Certainly, Hamas is propped up significantly by Iran, and there's no secret to that. In fact, the Hamas leader just a couple of years ago publicly stated if it weren't for Iran, we wouldn't have the capabilities that we now possess. And so essentially Iran is funding this Hamas war, and they have been for a long time. Now, the Iranians obviously try to get weapons in there, which the Israelis intercept as often as they can, but also Hamas, the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, they've learned how to produce these weapons themselves. presumably in mini factories underground. And they can make them out of abandoned water pipes. They even take dud Israeli missiles that failed to explode and stripped them for parts for their own missiles. So, in essence, Hamas has its own manufacturing capability for these rockets. And so that's what the Israelis are really on about here. The conflict, we can argue till the cows come home about who started it or how it started it, but the way it's going to end, certainly from Israel's point of view, is only when they have so significantly degraded Hamas's military capability that Hamas will be gun shy from attacking in the near future again. And as far as the Israeli political calculation goes, they think despite the international pressure, we have more time to hit this military infrastructure and we have plenty more targets to strike.
And I guess there is a pause on things until Hamas is able to, repair, rebuild some of those bombed tunnels and replenish its rocket stocks. Then it fires up again.
Well, that's right. And that's been a key feature of many of these terrorist insurgent groups that Israel and we of the West have been fighting against, certainly since 9/11 and indeed before. But it's their ability to regenerate that really stamps them. Whether it's top leaders who are ready to be replaced, or whether it's stockpiles that can be manufactured and replaced. So they have this uncanny technological edge where they're able to do this in secret, and they seem to have an unending reservoir of the desire, energy, and will to do this. I mean, it took, as I said, perhaps $1 billion to build these tunnels, just the tunnels, and years of labour. So, yes, I dare say that Hamas will regroup after this. It'll take time.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the 14th. I think it's the 14th conflict in the past 70 years. So this ain't going to be the last one. Michael Ware, good to chat as always. Fascinating stuff. Talk to you